So, can you tell us about yourself?
My name is Chine. Chine is a mom. I'm a lawyer. I'm an author, and which is what we're going to talk about today. My book, Purple, and I currently run a women's ministry, the Esther Generation. The purpose of the ministry is basically to awaken women to their purpose. Um, I'm just encouraging women to remember um, that there is more to the call on their life than just being married and having children, which is all good, but there's still so much more that God has in store for us. So, yeah, that's me.
Okay, that's interesting. So, take us through your testimony. In your book, you talked about your struggle with anxiety,
Mhm.
fear, and depression. When did this start exactly?
Um, so I grew up in a pretty normal family. The third child in a family of seven, second girl, and I had pretty normal childhood. Very imaginative child. I can't remember ever having like problems with fear or like being a timid child. And there was no such thing like at that age. Like I was just mostly playful. My family was when we were much younger, we were kind of well to do. So basically, there was nothing to bother me as a child at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I think it started for me when I got to boarding school. In Nigeria, it's called, well, some people call it high school, but secondary school. So my first year in boarding school, um, was it my first year? No, more like my second year in boarding school. So I went to an only girls Catholic boarding school, and the time when I was getting in, I thought it was just like my normal, like it's going to be fun. Growing up, I used to play house all the time, like have imaginary friends and all. And when you grow up in a house where you have like so many other siblings, like you hardly have your own thing. And so I thought that boarding school was just like an opportunity for me to have my own bed, my own box, like I'm going to have my own toy. We shared everything when we were much younger. So that was my impression of what boarding school was going to be like. And then I, I got to boarding school, and this was a school that had um, extreme bullying. So it was Catholic, it was only girls. But part of my major experiences that started breaking my spirit from the beginning was just like constantly I was being beat up. Like this was not the bullying of like they're just calling you names. This was the bullying of they would have senior students that would beat us and leave marks all over our body. So I was constantly, and of course at that point I would tell my mom like, oh, like they're bullying me. I was like constantly crying about it on visiting days, and she would just say, like, why didn't you report? Like, you should have reported to the sisters. Like, the sisters were the ones in charge of um, the boarding school then. And I'm like, I felt like my mom was the one that was supposed to fight for me because generally, when you're in boarding school, there's such a thing as snitching. If you snitch, you go and report. When you come back, the beating is extra. And then, of course, the seniors, it's not like the sisters are really going to do anything about it. They're just going to act like you're the only one that didn't know how to endure. So I was getting this you didn't know how to endure thing from my mom, or that I wasn't speaking up, which is why I was being beat up. And then I was also getting the same thing from like the vibe in the school and the sisters. They don't like the most they will do is they will caution the senior student. But we're talking about as in funny instances where would have I remember one of those instances like before the major thing that started that took me the delve down into like um anxiety, fear and depression. One of those instances that I remember that was that just as I think about it now, it just feels plain like demonic and wicked. We had this thing where on some Saturdays we'd have this thing we call Labor Day, where the labor prefect was going to share duties to different students. Like that was when we would cut grass or would sweep the school. And if you didn't do your normal morning duty, what we used to call morning duty, which is like they will give you something to do. So you either had a place to sweep or you had to wash the bathroom or something. If you hadn't done it the week before that Saturday, they were going to call you out to give you a punishment. And what was the punishment? There were two sets of people that were being punished: those who didn't do their duties during the week, and those who had long fingernails, so it wasn't, your fingernails were not cut. You were going to be sent to the lawn. We had this lawn where we used to kneel down to pray before the Mary grotto every evening, and you were going to scratch your hands on the lawn until however long your fingernails was, until it had either broken or it had been shaved back in. The other set of people who didn't do their duty during the week, what was the punishment? They were going, the senior students, there were two of them who were organizing this the meeting, a calling meeting. So they would ring the bell, everybody would gather in front of, like, there was this stand where the two senior students would stand, that's the labor prefects. They broke out thorns from, I can't even remember the name of this tree. Maybe it was a rose or so. I don't think we had rose, but there was this tree that had thorns. They broke out thorns from it. It was arranged on a table, and then they would call you out. One person would hold this hand, another person would hold this hand, and as they were asking you questions about your morning duty, they were using the thorns to pierce you. So for some people, it was just, oh, they were just shouting, and then they were saying that, then apologizing, begging. For others, you could see droplets of blood on their hands. And this was the kind of boarding school, as in, this was the kind of extreme bullying that was in a boarding school that I was going to. So what happened to me was, as a 12-year-old, at the point, I just felt my mom was not going to fight for me. Nobody was going to fight for me. And it seemed like a joke then, but where my school was located was close to a creek. Like, it was in River State in Nigeria. And then there was this creek that surrounded the boarding school. And then, of course, I had grown up as an imaginative child watching, like, the cartoons where if you had superpowers, you can beat up the bad guys. And I don't know whether it was the Nigerian movies I used to watch or something, but I just felt that if I had superpowers, these people would be afraid of me. I'm powerless now because I had no powers. And one of the ways in the movies that you would see people who get powers is that they would just call upon the gods and the goddesses, and then they would imbue them with power, and then they would, like, kill all the bad people. And so I did that, not once, like maybe once or twice. I would stand on the edge of the school, from, as in, where I could look over I can't even explain how the edge was, but I could look over and see, like, the river that surrounded the school. And then I don't even know what I was doing. And of course I didn't know what I was doing, but then Satan is not a respecter of whether you know what you're doing or not. And I'll be calling on these spirits. I'll be like, whatever. I didn't know it was spirits then. I was like, oh, that I would have so great power. I want to kill all the people who are just, they keep, their wickedness is too much. It was like a joke to me because I was doing what I had watched in movies. But this was me standing in front of a river or facing a river and asking that they should, I want powers to kill other people. And now I look back on it, after that period was when I started having dreams. Like, one of the things I didn't mention is that even as a child, I had been like an avid dreamer. I used to dream a lot, but I didn't know what that meant. And even when I used to tell people, they'll say it's because of them. I watched too much. That I watched too much movies the night before, which is why. So I always believed them. But then the dreams I had started intensifying. And then, of course, another thing that as it happened to me was that I was bitter. So I kept a book of all the senior students who had been punishing me. And I was just saying to myself that, oh, when I grow up, like, they will come, and I'll be working in a big company. And if any of them comes to look for a job in the company I was working, I was not going to give them a job. I was going to do back to them what they had done to me. All this I thought was just, childish, like me being young and all that. But one major thing happened that, like, kind of like sealed it for me. So there was this, my bunkmate at that time was a senior student, but she was always stealing from me. She would steal from me. She would take my stuff. Like, senior students were the powers in the school, and the only way I knew I could get back to her, I thought I could get back to her, was I would just take one of her uniforms from her box. When she's not looking, I'll take it outside and I would hide it somewhere, or I'd pour water on it. I'll throw it on the floor outside. It was my way of getting revenge on her, like. And then I would see her going about to borrow clothes, because you had two pairs of uniform. Like, this was boarding school. You had two pairs of everything: the day wear, the wear you go. We had different wears you wear for Sunday, and the one you wear to school. So I would maybe take one of her day wears, take it outside, throw it on the floor, and I'll be like stepping on it, pouring water on it to make it dirty. And to just make the story short, like, it boomeranged on me, because at a point they found out about it. They're like, "Oh, how dare you? You as in." It's bad enough that even when you didn't do something directly to a senior student, maybe you just didn't sweep, you get punishment. Talk less of if you actually did something, you had the audacity. And so that day, I can remember that from like maybe 10 a.m. till like 9 p.m. I don't know the amount of beating I received. There was a lot of punishment. After I had like served punishment, like, and this was like, they gave me some kind of punishment to, I don't know whether they asked me to sit down on the air and stretch my hands or something. I was like that for like 3 hours or so. And by the time you start shaking, or like they would beat you. Like if you shake, if you cry. So I didn't know. As in, at this point, I was full of a lot of fear that I was in a lot of trouble. And what was the excuse I came up with? They kept asking me, what gave me the audacity? Why did I do it? Why did I do it? And then I started saying that, oh, I've been having these dreams, and I just felt like a voice was telling me to do it. At this point, I don't think there was any, I can't remember actually having any voice, but that was the only excuse I could come up with. But then this was Nigeria. This was a school where like people believed in witchcraft. They believed, there had been stories that we had been hearing about people who had been witches and I didn't understand that at the point I was doing that, that this was not just an escape route. They were actually going to take it seriously, and they did. And because what happened to me that day was that it went from them, because I was able to convince them at a point that it wasn't me, that it was like I heard voices, I was being controlled by something. So the news spread around that there was a witch and I was the witch. So the next thing was that I started receiving a different set of beating. People were beating me, they were knocking me, they took me to still close to that river area. Like there was this dustbin where there were a lot of trees, and they pushed me in that place, and they said if I was really a witch that I needed to be like delivered. So I had to use some of the leaves to like flog myself to be. And this was me at 12 years old. Like that was one of the only thing I could think of then. I don't know if my mind actually just went blank, or as in I can't even imagine. I'm trying to remember to a certain extent how heavy that night was for me, because I was thinking to myself, even if my mom, I told my mom I felt I'm in a lot of trouble, I've done something bad, my mom will not defend me. Even if I went to tell his sister I'm actually a witch, what happened was that something happened to my mind that night, that I forgot that I had come up with a reason. I started believing. They beat me to the extent that I believed at the point that I was actually a witch. And I went back to my room to sleep. And so for the next day, I would go into the dining hall, and I would enter into, and everybody was whispering around me. People didn't want to sit down close to me. And then there were still senior students that kept coming to, as in harass me, to beat me. Like anybody that would just see me will call me to knock me on the head, to beat me. And this was just, at the point I was so broken that I went to as into the staff room, and I told the teacher that I just started confessing that yes, I was a witch, but that these people were really, they wanted to kill me, they were beating me. They were at this point, they were looking for me to continue the beating as at the second day. And so they called their, as in the assembly, everybody together on the assembly ground. And one of the teachers who used to be like as in one of the people that handles all these cases of witchcraft in the school, or like rumors of witchcraft, he came and he made the announcement that nobody should touch me, nobody should as in harass me again, that the school was going to handle it themselves. But at this point, everybody in the school knew me, or there were rumors going around in the school, and everybody, my classmates themselves, even when they were like, they would come around me and they're like, how could you do such a thing? You were this, you were that. So I heard so much, and then so many people pointing fingers and blaming me, that I believed at that point. It took me years to actually go back to that traumatic event to remember the actual truth that happened. And it started the pattern of me just accepting people putting blame on me. Like so, after that period, I started experiencing a lot of depression. I dealt with a lot of shame, of course, and then I was in extreme fear all the time. So it was that was the beginning of it for me. And my only option at that point was I just thought to myself that as in the next time that this kind of thing happens, I was going to drink my bleach, because I wanted a way out. I felt nobody was going to help me, nobody was going to save me. I didn't even tell my mother what had happened at this point. the only comfort that I thought to myself was that next time that the senior students tried to beat me, I was going to drink my bleach. That at that point they would know I was serious. And now that I think back on it, that was just Satan that wanted to take my life. But immediately I convinced myself that if I died, there was a way out. I was at rest. I felt like, oh, there was an option for me to escape if such a thing ever arose again.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Delving into that experience is is hard, and it can be a very hard thing to relieve that experience. So your experience in boarding school was the starting point of your dive into this thing that you explained as fear,
Yeah.
as constant fear of your life, depression and anxiety. Did you seek any help in school at that time or any time beyond that? Did you seek counseling, therapy of any kind?
Yeah, so in Nigeria, there was not so much knowledge about mental health issues or therapy or counseling at that time. Um, but we had this thing in school we used to call a guidance counselor. So I didn't know, like, I didn't have the terminology for the things. I didn't even know that something had gone wrong in me. I think that it just became a question of me moving from being the imaginative, cheerful, playful child to just being withdrawn and then having what I called, as in, I used to describe it as, then even now, like I think about it, I wonder who gave me those words. I used to describe it as walking around with a constant cloud over my head. I used to feel this sense of heaviness that I couldn't explain. So I would go to the guidance counselor and I would be trying to explain it, but I didn't know the language with which to explain it. At this point, I did believe that, as in I was a witch, I was a bad person. I had been convinced that I was a bad person. So I didn't have friends. I didn't really have people who were, and then my family had dived into a system, a little bit of financial problems. So I never paid school fees on time. Nobody was going to be my school mother. Nobody, so I was dealing with rejection at the same time. So yes, I did try, but my parents didn't really know. Um, and I think it was after, as in, I had attempted to kill myself once back at home when they wanted to take me back to boarding school. After my third year in boarding school, I went back and I told my mom I wasn't going to go back to that school again. And she kept insisting that I must finish in the boarding school. And Satan had so convinced me at that point that the only way to let people know that you're serious is just go drink something. Go drink something poisonous. And so I went and attempted to drink kerosene at the back of the house. It's I think the only reason why I didn't swallow it is that if you ever put kerosene in your mouth, it's like putting raw fire in it. It was so hot, I spat it out. And I went back, and for the first time, I told my mother that these people had said I was a witch, they had beat me up, nobody had defended me, and that even the next year after that, every opportunity they had, they used to beat me. Like, they would slap me, and I would have the fingers like showing on my face throughout that day. And I would go to the sister and I would show her. And then she would call the senior student and start preaching to them about how, this is not how you should behave. But there are 5 fingers on my face. And this person had spent the last 10 minutes hitting me like a drum all over my back. So I knew that, I told her that I would rather drop out of school and not go back. This is me at 12 or 13 than go back to school. So my mom withdrew me from the boarding school and I went to a day school. And there it was a Christian day school. So at this point I had other teachers. I also came out of the Catholic church and I was attending a Pentecostal church. So depression now became a normal thing. It was like the way a person just waits for the menstrual cycle every month. Every month I knew I was going to have I used to call it depression bout. Just a day or two in the month where I would just break down. Like I won't be able to stand up. I will be unable to eat, unable to talk, unable to associate with people. I had coaches in church, so they were not really counselors per se. They were just coaches, like more like they would tell me, oh, you know what, you should do this, you should do that. Maybe like make friends, talk. You need to talk more. You need to read your Bible. And of course all this was within the church, like, because one of the things that I turned to when I was convinced that I was a bad person was I turned to Christianity. So church now became this way of me trying to be a good person. And one of the things that happened to me even before I left boarding school was on one of those days we were having this class. We had this thing we call Christian Religious Studies, CRS. And then the teacher had asked this question. I'm not really somebody who used to talk in class, but she asked this question, something from the Bible or something from our textbook, and she wanted somebody to explain it. And so I stood up and I gave an explanation of it. I think I talked for like 5 minutes or 7 minutes, not so long. And when I finished, the next thing she said, "Wow, you sound like an evangelist." She was like, "Everybody, this is one of the most excellent as an analysis of anything about scriptures or Christian I have heard from a junior student." And people were just clapping for me in class. And this was the first time I have ever heard such a praise from, and I was like, I think what clicked in my head that day was that if I was a Christian, that people would like me. So at that point, many of the things I began to do was church related. At this time, I didn't know that it was just like a cover for me. Like I was so afraid that um, if I wasn't Christian or good enough, nobody was going to be my friend. Nobody was going to like me. But if I could speak the Christianese language, like be that, as in have that constant God thing, nobody would realize that I was really like not a good person, a bad person, and stuff like that. So my coaches, and even when I kept having this depression thing, I would sit down in chairs and they would talk to me like, tell us what the problem is. I couldn't make myself talk. I wanted to talk. I could not talk. I would go for days without eating, staring at the wall. They would do everything to try to make me talk. I wanted to talk. I couldn't. And then I would hear stuff like, depression is not of God. God has not given you the spirit of fear. And we just give you that scripture as if, oh, receive the scripture and be free. Like, as soon as they just quote the script, it was as if they just expected, once I quote the scriptures to you, you are free. But the problem is, I would hear this over and over again. Like, to ask, no, don't you believe the scriptures? Are you not a Christian? Yes, I believe the scriptures. I'm a Christian. Yes, so you are free. Yeah, but I wasn't experiencing that freedom. So part of the problem was that there wasn't really so much of the kind of normal clinical counseling that you should have gotten. And even the men of God that I got to speak to, because even after secondary school, going into university, the first year of my university, the depression followed me. The constant struggle with suicidal thoughts followed me. And I think it was just because of the mercies of God, because I would literally leave school sometimes, go somewhere, and there was this night that it was so bad for me. Like I sat laid down inside the bathroom and I had razors, like not razors, like this stuff, like it was razor. And I wanted to just, nobody knew. Like I came to my auntie's house. She was sleeping downstairs. I was upstairs and I was like, I can't take this anymore. This cloud over this constant heaviness, sadness. And I've been talking to people for years. I have been searching. I was listening to all kinds of messages. I would go from one preacher to the other. I was reading a lot of psychology books because for some reason, of course, as years went by, I got to know about a bit about psychology, not really mental health, but psychology. And there were books that I would read, coaches I would listen to, that it would give me a bit of relief for some time. But the thing always came back. Over and over again, it would come back. The relief would last just a little bit. Sometimes I would go to church in the presence of God, like in the atmosphere of worship, in the deep presence of God. There's this peace that will come on me. But that thing didn't last. I would go back home and it would be like that cloud has come back over me again, the heaviness. And I was just going to just slit my wrist. I said, okay, I'm just gonna die. I can't do this anymore. Like I cannot. And what saved me that night was actually music. I understand when we had these very simple phones that could only take two songs. These phones that had just infrared, and I didn't even necessarily used to listen to it too much. I didn't even remember that I had put in a song, and for some reason I was like, okay, I'm just going to play music very loudly so nobody knows. I don't even know why I thought of slitting my hand, because that would have been very painful. But I think I was so numbed by the heaviness, like the pain, I don't, if you've ever struggled with depression and the way the unrest that it brings to you, you're looking for relief. I just felt, I didn't think that slitting myself would be more painful than continuing to live with that constant sense of helplessness and hopelessness. So for me, it was more like, so I would play the music loud. If I screamed, if I caught myself, my auntie would not hear. She would think it was music. And then I just decided, I wasn't even thinking, play the song. I thought it was the radio. And the song was, I don't know, I think probably somebody in church had given me that song through infrared and I didn't even know. It was, I can't remember the name of the guy, but the lyrics of the song is, I speak life, you're going to live, um, my brother, my sister. I speak life, you are the head. So the title of the song was I Speak Life. And this songwriter was just saying, it was like it was a declaratory song, and I stopped and I cried myself and didn't. I think that was the last time I attempted to actually kill myself within that period of time, but not that the depression left. So yeah.
Is it the Donald Lawrence song?
Ah, the Donald Lawrence song,
I love
yes.
that song.
Yeah.
So what I hear you say is that you've had very long like traumatic experience over
Mm,
bearing life. It seemed like it wasn't going away. It seemed like it kept coming back no
yeah.
matter what you did. It
Yeah.
seemed like nobody could break through that wall. But
Mm-hmm.
another thing that I heard was that despite all those times that it felt like it was going to be over, God came through for you. And
Yeah.
those with unexpected things like songs, like
Mm-hmm.
you even just not doing that, or even despite the fact that you made up your mind that you were going to take hypo, but somehow, all
Yeah.
those things.
Funny, yeah, funny enough, like throughout the period when I was waiting to take bleach, there no incidents happened that year in school. Like I was like ready to, and I wasn't even calling upon God to save me. I was just like, oh, if something just happens, I will. And for that particular semester, nothing happened. So yeah, it's interesting that God actually did show up, like without me knowing. He was saving me, like probably not probably he was actually, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So, at what point did you begin to experience freedom? When did you feel like you? Because I heard you say that sometimes you felt that some of these things seemed temporary and short lived. At
Mm-hmm.
one point, were you convinced without a shadow of doubt that you've had your deliverance?
So I think for me, which is the whole aim of like me sharing my testimony and the book Purple was over the years, my problem with depression was more like it lasted for, I think, for most of my years in the university. So what I kept doing was I started using, when I felt like, I started coming up with various ways to try to solve my problem. So in the university, of course, you start getting access to a lot of information. A lot of people start advising you. There are a different set of coaches, and some of these were more like self-help kind of things. So they were like, oh, like you're always afraid. And at this point, it was when I now started noticing the fear, because I've been talking about depression all this while. I started noticing the fear, and as in how much fear I had in me. So this was me as a law student who was afraid to speak. Like I was literally afraid to speak in the presence of other people, and I didn't understand. Like my fear was so acute that I didn't have the ability to say no to people. So it was constantly putting me in wrong relationships. I would know that this was not really what I wanted, but I would be too afraid of rejection to say no, like to stand my ground for in that kind of thing. So I started, when people started mentioning to me that, why are you always like, it's like you're always timid and all that, I now started realizing, oh, so maybe something is wrong, maybe I'm abnormal. Other people don't seem to be this way. And so one of the things like that was suggested to me is, oh, do what you're afraid of, as it's very common. Like, but I took it literally, because at this point I started getting desperate to be free. I now at like 18 or 19 started realizing that there was a problem. Like this was not just about me being not knowing that, it was feeling something but not knowing this. At this point I knew something was wrong, so, and I started fighting it because people had around me had already started noticing something is wrong with this person. Why are you always gloomy, you're never smiling? And so I was like, my fear now shifted to nobody likes me because I'm not friendly, I'm not, and I'm not bold. So I started putting a lot of activities on myself. I would go for pageants because I was like, this is me that was so afraid to talk in front of people. So I thought, oh, if I go for a national pageant, that's Miss Nigeria, I would have faced my fear and that I will overcome it. I went, it was horrifying because it was worse. I think I was even like, I didn't even stay up to the second or the third week. I was, what did they call it? What's this word when you were ejected from the house? Like,
Evicted.
I was evicted. And part of the reason for my eviction was that I was constantly on my own. Like, I was afraid, I was feeling very insecure. And of course, I was evicted from that one. It just added to the rejection. I came back. I got involved in a lot of competitions in school. I would go from one mood court I was representing my faculty and I was pushing myself. Like I would rehearse to be able to speak out, like do debate competitions. And this was taking a toll on me because I was struggling so hard for people not to see how afraid I was. Like I would literally be talking and I would be trembling, like my hands would be trembling when I was talking to people. So I didn't want them to notice like just how fearful I was. I would rehearse, I would go, I'd even traveled out of the outside school, like going for inter-school competitions, and I would be the lead speaker because everybody will say to me, as in when they heard me speak, they were like, "Oh, this person is so good. You're so good. I'm so sure you're going to be in practice." So they were praising me, and that was somehow that was kind of like the affirmation I needed, but it wasn't solving the fear within because every time I would go for those stuff, I would come back, I would be drained. And these things I was doing that were extra, they were taking my time. Like I wasn't concentrating on schoolwork the way I should. I joined a dance group, I was in the choir in my church, and my church was a very big church, and the choir commitment was a lot. And I was combining this with school. And then when I realized how much these things were affecting me, I didn't have the courage to go back and tell these people no. Because like of course I was afraid that if I did, like they would tell me of how I've done the wrong thing. Why should I have started before? So it was just a circle for me. I started having insomnia and I was looking, and the more this was happening, the more I was reading more books to try out more ideas. Like I'm even saying most of these things to show the extent to which I tried. I was desperate to try anything to overcome this fear, like as in to overcome the depression. I was willing to push myself to many. I think I attended like 3 pageants, like at within my second to my third year, my fourth year, and my grades. I was at I was at almost at the first class as in, at the time I started this, and it was just by the grace of God that I still graduated with a very high 2-1 with the amount of activities, the amount of insomnia, and the amount of bad relationships I got into, and just by the grace of God was able to escape just in time. Like had issues with guys to the point where I had people who had attempted to rape me twice because I'd put myself in situations where this person is not healthy for you, but you don't know how to tell the person no. So
They also know you're vulnerable.
they also knew I was vulnerable because, of course, like people can sense the spirit you carry. They can sense whether or not you are bold. But if you can put up like the whole airs of like. After my first year, I started putting on makeup. I started like as I changed my dressing, I revamped my entire wardrobe because I just felt, oh, if I looked different, people would treat me differently. It didn't really change how I felt within. So to the point where I started experiencing or where deliverance started coming for me, it took years. Finished university. Um, it came more from um, slowly realizing the spirituality of life, as in like the spiritual aspect to my problems. Because before I started coming to certain knowledge of the spirits behind some certain emotions I had often treated them as emotions. I didn't see anything. I didn't understand the as in, or I didn't even connect the dots as to that there was anything like the spirit aspect of some of the problems I was going through. And by the time I remember vividly, and I shared that experience in the book. It was one of the first things I wrote about being 3 months pregnant. and I had started experiencing suicidal like tendencies again. I was 3 months pregnant, sitting down on my mom's bed, and I was struggling with a strong urge to go and kill myself. Like it was such a strong emotion on me at that point, and I was afraid. I was afraid because I don't know if you've ever experienced overwhelming emotions, or you've ever been in, it's like being in an addictive situation where you are afraid that you cannot control yourself. And it was at this point I went on the internet. I started looking for suicide resources because I wasn't just afraid for myself. I felt I am carrying a child, and I cannot stop myself from thinking about the relief that will come if I die. So I went on the internet to look for some resources. I found some kind of suicide. Of course, it wasn't Nigerian. It was something. I was in Nigeria at that time, so it was something maybe in the UK or the US. It was a Christian suicide helpline. And then I had this, you know, when you send like a desperate SOS, yeah, please, can somebody talk to me? I need help. I need someone to reach out to me. And you know, it was that kind of like heartfelt plea. And then there was someone who sent me some scriptures. They prayed with me. Like most of it was a chat. It wasn't a phone call because like I couldn't afford to make the phone call from Nigeria to the US at that time. But it gave me a little bit of relief for me to be able to sleep that night. But by the next morning, I woke up, and many times that thing would come heavier on me in as I was about to sleep, or as I was waking up in the morning. The heaviness will come back on me, and so I woke up that morning, and I was like, and I was so broken. I said to the Lord, you have to help me. I can't, you have to help me. Like something is wrong. Like I cannot continue like this. This thing hasn't left me. And I felt like I had, you know, when you just come to the point where you're saying to yourself, I feel like I've come to the end of myself. It's not even just about, you know, me like saying to myself back when I was young that, oh, this was an escape route. I didn't want to die. But I felt like my life had spun so out of control that if something did not happen, some kind of intervention, I was going to jump off the roof or something. That was how badly drawn to suicide I was at that point. And I remember that as I was going to travel back to, I was going to travel that morning. I was going to the bathroom, and I heard in my spirit, and all this while, of course, I didn't see every single aspect of my life. All this while, all these things, I was a Christian. As in, I pray in tongues, I go to church. I said I had met a lot of Christian counselors, pastors, to pray over me, to talk to me, to advise me. And one of the problems I saw in the faith, at least then in Nigeria, it was that they just kept feeling like as long as you're a Christian, you should not be depressed. Like as if you had the responsibility to not be depressed. It's like, why are you not reading enough of the Word of God? Oh, you're not praying enough. You're not reading. You're not Christian enough. And this, for someone who was dealing with just that feeling of constantly being like, I had not let go of that feeling like I was the bad person. So to hear that I was not Christian enough and that was why I was suffering was not helping me at that point. But I believed them that it was because maybe I was. That's why I was continually trying to do more, trying to do more. But anyway, the Lord, as in, I knew that it was the Lord that just met. There was somebody that I was offended at. Of course, like what had happened to me years ago in boarding school, I wasn't really thinking about it. I knew I had trauma in my life, but I wasn't really thinking about it to connect it that way. And then he reminded me, and of course, other things had happened along the way. And one of them was, of course, I kept talking about entering relationships, coming out, bad relationships coming out, making bad choices as to relationships because I had no self esteem. I was struggling with rejection. And one of those relationships I had entered into was the one that I had so believed that, oh, this was the guy that was going to marry me. I had built my whole life around him. Like I felt like that for this person to choose me, I must be special. Finally, like it was going to, that was quote unquote at that time for me. I thought it was the happiest time of my life. So for this person to have come back like less than 6 months later to say to me that he was sorry, he didn't love me anymore, it was like a confirmation to me that as in something was wrong with me. So it was at that time that I started as in my life went off track totally. It was like I can't recover from this. So I didn't know. This was like 1 year later when the Lord reminded me of that guy, and I was like, well, as he was saying it, he said, you're bitter towards this person, and that part of why the suicidal tendencies is on you. I don't think the Lord told me that the suicidal tendencies was because of my bitterness, but the first thing He reminded me of was that I had somebody I needed to forgive. So this was me walking towards the bathroom. I was like, I've forgiven him. I said it several times. I've forgiven him. He said no. And then he said, he held up my life like a mirror. He reminded me of how I had dated somebody in my third year in university. And at some point, I had told the guy that I'm sorry, I don't really feel the same way about you. Like, I love you as a person, but I'm not in love with you. And it was like, this is exactly what this other person had done to you. The difference is that when you did that to that guy, he didn't act like you were the worst person in the world. He continued to be your friend. He was hurt, yes, but he forgave. He said, but you, somebody else did it to you. And what you did was that you kept cursing him. You were bitter towards him. You kept saying how you can never do this to another person. You could never have treated another person in this manner. And he just kept showing me how. So it was the Lord at that point just showing me how I had so much bitterness in my heart. I was deceiving myself that, oh, I'm a Christian. I don't hold bitterness. And at that point, it was less about what the Holy Spirit was saying than the convictions that was coming into my. At this point, I didn't understand why was the Lord talking to me about forgiveness when I was about to try. It was like there was no connection, but I was so broken in my spirit that I forgave, because when God holds a mirror up to you to show you yourself, you realize how easy it is for you to judge every other person and say, oh, I can never do this kind of thing to another. I'm incapable of being this mean. And then God shows you exactly how you have been this mean, and you're like, oh my God, I repented and I said, Lord, I forgive. I realized that I've been holding on to bitterness, and I'm not even exaggerating. I was in the bathroom I just wanted to ease myself and then go and carry my box downstairs. I felt this thing in my brain. It was like there was this release, like when maybe you've been wearing a tight hat on your head, and then you take it off and you feel like the blood is beginning to flow in your brain. It was like an instant release in my brain, and I felt that heaviness, that suicidal tendency, it left me immediately. And I was like, oh my God. I immediately knew that there was a connection between my unforgiveness and bitterness and my spiral down some certain emotions. So at that point, I began to realize the spirituality of certain things I thought were just emotions. And it began my search in God, because I had prayed that morning, and even after I had begged the Lord and said, Lord, that you need to do something for me, part of the prayers I'd also been praying is I would tell myself over and over again that if God can heal the body, why can't He heal the mind? Like when I used to go to these pastors to ask for help, and they would just make it sound like, oh, this, and I would come back and I would ask myself that is it that there is no healing for the mind in God? Like, is there something that, why is it that people can touch people who have maybe a growth, a broken leg, and then they will be healed? But when it comes to my mind, it's like they don't even fine, they pray for me, but it's as if they feel like it is totally up to me to just decide.
Yeah.
Snap out of it. Like I've had so many people.
Just by willpower, right?
Yeah, it made it seem like it was a willpower thing. It's like several times they will want to tell me to snap out of it. Like snap out of it. You shouldn't be this way. Like, and so I was now realizing that perhaps there was a system in God. So that began my deliverance journey, because it wasn't a one-time thing. It was me now going to search in the scriptures, to search and ask God very difficult questions. I was willing to do, if it meant that I needed to, like, unpack some certain things in my life to be free, I was willing to do that. So to just cut the story short, over time, part of what now started happening to me was that I started studying about the spirituality of life. I started having an understanding of the fact that certain emotions, if um, if a person has tried everything they can, you've gone for this therapy, you've gone for this evaluation, you've had coaches, you've tried this method, which is what I did, and somehow it's like you cannot shake off a particular emotion. You've tried everything. I began to understand that many times it is no longer just a physical or just a mere feeling. I believe everybody has feelings. God gave us feelings for us to be able to have indications of certain things in our lives. But when it gets to the point where you cannot control your feelings, you are no longer in charge. Like your feelings are now what dictates to you how you act. At that point, it's not normal anymore. There is a spirit entity behind it. What that did for me was that I stopped addressing the emotion. I started addressing the spirit behind the emotions. And not just that, I started addressing the spirit behind the emotions. I started realizing access points. And that's one of the things I discuss a lot in my book. Like that, for something to have access to you, there was one of the scriptures that the Lord gave me as I continued my search and my study into, like, as in healing for the mind. And he told me something. He said, Chine, this is it's actually a scripture. He said, to whom you yield yourself to obey, you become a slave. And so basically what the Lord was saying to me is that if that thing has its hold over you, you have agreed with it. And so it became an unpeeling of layers. Like, and I had actually mentioned that I had stood on the cliff and then said as a child, oh, I want to have superpowers. And to me, like, I want to have powers, let the spirits come into me. And to me, I was repeating what I said in a movie, what I saw in a movie. What I didn't know was that Satan is wicked. I had opened myself up to spiritual attacks. Like, I should have even, of course, I wouldn't have known, but the fact that I started having increase in dreams and nightmares after that, the fact that the depression increased, like, so I had the problem of me, as in me actually inviting spirits to come and inhabit me. I had the problem of bitterness, like that I was angry at people. So the bitterness started from the university, from my secondary school, and I carried on that same bitterness as more people, like the attempted rapes, as more people broke my heart, I got into wrong. The list of people who I was bitter at continued to increase. So this was me bitter. And then, of course, like, I believed a lot of lies about myself. Like, I believed that I was a bad person. And I would say, this is not just me just thinking in my head, oh, I'm a bad person. I would literally be in the bathroom crying, thinking of myself, and I'll say it over and over again, oh, I'm a bad person. I will be hitting my hand on the wall, I'm such a bad person. So this is me declaring I'm a bad person to myself. So the power of life and death is in the tongue. I'm speaking the wrong things over myself. Oh, like, this is why nobody likes